The first real sign came 2 nights later, just past midnight. I was asleep in my chair by the window, habit more than comfort, an old Agent S trick to keep one ear on the street, when the sound of a car door jolted me awake. Not the normal slam of a neighbor's teenage kid coming home late, but a soft click, deliberate, as if the driver was trying not to be heard. I stayed still, breathing evenly, my silhouette framed in the lamplight like bait. The cane leaned against the armrest, my hand resting casually on it. I listened. Footsteps crunched over gravel, 3 sets. They moved in rhythm, careful, military careful. Then came the whisper. Front window. I had the answer in 3 heartbeats. This wasn't random. The punks from earlier hadn't forgotten. Someone had paid them, or someone had noticed their humiliation and decided to push further. I rose slowly, stretching as though I were nothing more than a restless insomniac. Then I killed the lamp with a flick of my finger, plunging the room into darkness. "Move!" one of them hissed outside. I smiled. They had no idea the lawn was wired. Not with explosives, those days were behind me, but with simple, elegant deterrents. A trip line, thin as spider silk, stretched between the hedge and the porch railing. A soft clink followed as the first man hit it. He cursed, stumbling forward. I moved to the back door, quiet, practiced. My body wasn't what it used to be, but the muscle memory never left. I slipped outside and circled wide, staying in the shadows. The moonlight painted their outlines clearly enough. 3 figures, 2 crouched low, 1 standing watch. "Window's clear," the leader whispered. "Clear," I repeated softly, right behind him. He stiffened. Before he could turn, my cane jabbed into his kidney. He gasped, dropping to his knees. The other 2 spun, startled. "Who the hell are you?" one demanded, raising a crowbar. "Wrong question," I replied. "You should be asking who sent you." The crowbar swung, clumsy and too slow. I caught his wrist, twisted, and sent the weapon clattering into the grass. He yelped, more frightened than hurt. The third one took a step back, hands raised. Young, maybe 22, with eyes too clear for this kind of work. "We don't want trouble," he stammered. "You already brought it." The leader groaned on the ground, spitting curses. I crouched beside him, cane pressed to his throat. "Names, now." He glared at me, but his bravado cracked under the weight of silence. Finally, he muttered, "Cole. Name's Cole. From the bar. Said you made his boys look stupid. Offered cash if we scared you a little." I exhaled through my nose. So it was Cole. Local small-time dealer, mouth bigger than his empire. I'd ignored him for years because he was beneath my notice. But now he was tugging on a string he didn't understand. "Tell Cole," I said, standing and hauling the man up by his collar, "that if he wants to play, he should bring more than children." I shoved him back toward the street. "Go." They didn't hesitate. They bolted, dragging their pride behind them. The night went still again. I stood alone on the lawn, the cicadas humming in the distance. My pulse was steady, my mind sharp. But a weight pressed in on me. Cole wasn't clever enough to orchestrate this on his own. Someone else was watching, someone who knew my past or suspected enough to test my defenses. The next morning, Martha noticed I looked more tired than usual. "You all right, Mr. Carter?" she asked, setting down my coffee. I gave her a small smile. "Didn't sleep much." Her brow furrowed. "You want me to pack you some pie? Might help?" I almost laughed. Pie against shadows. But her kindness stirred something in me I thought I'd buried years ago. The instinct to protect. "Thank you," I said softly, "but I think I'll be needing more than pie before long." What I didn't tell her was that by sundown, I would be calling in one of those favors the agency promised I'd never need. Because the wolves were gathering, and I was done waiting for them to come to my door. By sundown, the small bungalow I'd called home for 8 years had transformed from a quiet retiree SS refuge into something closer to an operations hub. I'd swept the walls for listening devices. None yet, though I found a wireless camera under my neighbor's eave, pointed directly at my porch. That was new. I cut its power and left it dangling, a message for whoever installed it. Then I opened the old steel lockbox hidden in the back of my closet. Inside lay a leather-bound notebook, a burner phone, and an encrypted USB drive. The notebook was full of numbers, codes, and phrases that had saved my life more than once. The phone had only 3 contacts. One was for emergencies so dire I'd rather be dead than use it. The second was for an old friend who owed me everything. The third was for a woman I hadn't spoken to in 15 years. I stared at the numbers for a long time. Then I dialed the second one. "Carter," a gravelly voice answered after 2 rings. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again." "Eli," I said quietly. "I've got a problem." "That's funny," he replied. "So do I. My problem's a bottle of scotch that keeps getting lighter." "Yours?" I gave him the short version, 3 punks, then 3 more, and a local dealer named Cole who was suddenly acting bold. Eli whistled low. "Cole's a pawn," he said. "Word is someone's buying influence in that town. Real estate, trucking routes, union reps. Could be cartel. Could be a private firm with dirty money." I felt my jaw tighten. "Any names?" "Not yet," Eli said. "But I can dig. What do you want me to do?" "Find out who's behind Cole," I said, "and find out how much they know about me." There was a pause. "If they know enough to test you, Dan." "I know." "I'll call you back in 12 hours, he said. I hung up and slipped the phone back into the lockbox. Outside, the street was quiet. Too quiet. At dusk, a knock came at my door. 3 soft taps evenly spaced, the kind of knock only an operative would use. My hand went to the cane automatically. "Who is it?" I asked. "It's me," a woman's voice said. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I knew that voice, even after 15 years. I opened the door a crack. There she stood, Rachel Quinn, the woman from the 3rd number on my burner phone. Her hair was streaked with silver now, her eyes just as sharp as I remembered. She wore a plain jacket and jeans, but everything about her posture screamed professional. "Rachel," I said, "what are you doing here?" "I was in Chicago," she said simply. "Heard your name come up in chatter I didn't like. Thought I'd stop by." I stepped aside and let her in. She moved like a ghost, scanning the room in one glance. "You're already compromised," she said quietly. "Tell me something I don't know." She sat at my kitchen table, folding her hands. "This isn't just Cole. Someone's digging up old files. They know you had a package when you retired. They think it's cash." "It's not cash." "They don't care," she said. "They think you're sitting on $7 million in untraceable currency, and they think you're too old to fight." I almost smiled. "They're wrong on both counts." She leaned forward. "Dan, listen to me. This isn't a test anymore. They're escalating. Next time it won't be punks. It'll be professionals." "Good," I said softly. I was starting to get bored. Her eyes searched mine. "You're serious?" "I didn't retire because I forgot how to fight," I said. "I retired because I didn't want to anymore. But if they're coming for me, then I'll end it before it starts." Rachel exhaled, a long, slow breath. "You always were a stubborn bastard. And you always were better at intel than anyone I knew. So tell me what you've got." She pulled a small folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside were surveillance photos. Cole with 2 men I didn't recognize, both dressed too neatly to be street level. One wore a signet ring with an emblem I couldn't quite place. "Who are they?" I asked. "Private security firm out of Miami," she said. "But their funding traces back to an offshore account that's been used by 3 different cartels in the last decade. Whoever's bankrolling them wants a foothold here." I stared at the photos. Pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. Someone with real money had targeted this quiet town, and I'd just become the obstacle they hadn't expected. "Then we'll give them a reason to regret it," I said. Rachel tilted her head. "We?" I met her eyes. If you're here, you're already involved. A slow, familiar smile curved her lips. Guess I missed this life more than I thought. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, speckling the windows. Thunder rolled far off. It sounded like a warning or a promise. I stood, tucking the photos back into the folder. Let's go pay Cole a visit. Rachel rose too, slipping something small and metallic into her pocket. Lead the way. Together we stepped into the night, two ghosts from a past life walking straight toward a storm. Cole's office was the back room of a rundown pool hall on the edge of town. Neon signs buzzed weakly in the windows, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke bleeding into the damp night air. Rachel and I didn't park out front. We left the car 2 blocks away and approached on foot, silent and measured, like old habits demanded. Inside, the pool hall was half full, blue smoke curling above worn tables, clack of balls echoing through low chatter. A jukebox hummed some country tune about heartbreak and cheap whiskey. Most of the patrons were locals who knew better than to make eye contact with strangers, but a few faces turned toward us, lingering just a second too long. Spotters. Cole wasn't stupid. Rachel leaned in close, whispering, 3 watching the floor. 1 by the bar, 1 by the exit. I've got the exit, I murmured back. We didn't look at each other again. We moved like we always had, 2 currents flowing separate but together, never colliding, always aligned. I found Cole in the back room, exactly where I expected. He sat behind a battered desk, a cheap cigar smoldering in an ashtray, his shirt half unbuttoned like he thought he was running a casino instead of a failing racket. His knee was bandaged, my handiwork from the alley. Well, he drawled, blowing smoke. The old man who thinks he's still dangerous. Rachel closed the door behind us with a click. Cole's smile faltered when he saw her. He recognized professionalism when it walked into his den. I don't think I'm dangerous, Cole, I said evenly. I know I am, and you've been making mistakes. He leaned back, trying to look relaxed. Big talk for a retiree. You've got a fancy cane and some lucky hits, that's it. You don't scare me. I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving his. I don't need to scare you. I need you to answer one question. Who are you working for? Cole laughed, though it rang hollow. Like I'd tell you. Rachel moved faster than his eye could follow. In one motion, she swept his cigar off the desk and pressed the glowing tip close to his bandaged knee. He yelped, jerking back, eyes wide with sudden fear. You think he's bluffing? She said coldly. I don't bluff. Cole swallowed hard, sweat forming at his temple. He darted a glance toward the door, but Rachel's stance blocked it. My cane rested casually at my side, but he knew what it could do. All right, he spat, voice cracking. Name's Dwyer, Vincent Dwyer. Runs some private outfit out of Miami. Big money. Said he wants a footprint here, and you... He jabbed a finger at me, trembling now. You embarrassed his men when you dropped those punks. Word is you've got something valuable. Something he wants. Rachel shot me a look. I kept my face impassive. What did you tell him, Cole? Nothing, Cole stammered. Just that you're some old guy with cash. I swear I didn't... I drove the cane down on the desk with a crack that made him flinch. Wrong answer. What did you tell him? His mouth worked silently for a moment. Then, that you were CIA, retired. That you walked away with a package. 7 mil, maybe more. Silence stretched in the room. My stomach knotted. Not at the revelation, but at the fact that Cole knew enough to say it. Someone had fed him that intel. Someone had my file. Rachel leaned in close to his ear. If you're lying, Cole, he'll know. And if you're not, you've just signed your death warrant anyway. Dwyer doesn't keep loose ends. Cole's face went pale. He wiped sweat from his forehead. Please, I didn't mean nothing by it. I was just trying to stay alive. Then you'd better help us, I said. Where's Dwyer now? Cole hesitated, and Rachel nudged his bad knee with the toe of her boot. He whimpered. "Warehouse by the river," he blurted. "They've been moving trucks in and out for weeks. Night runs, no paperwork, I don't ask questions." Rachel and I exchanged a glance. A warehouse meant staging ground, supplies, men, weapons. Whoever Dwyer was, he was planting roots. I leaned close enough for Cole to smell the years of steel in my voice. "You've got one chance to disappear. Leave tonight. Leave everything. If I see you again, you won't walk away." He nodded frantically, eyes darting between us. Yeah, I'm gone. You won't hear from me again." Rachel and I left him there, trembling behind his desk. Outside, the night was damp and thick with mist rising off the river. "You believe him?" Rachel asked. "Enough," I said. "But I don't trust him. Cole's a coward. He'll try to run, but Dwyer's people will catch him first." "Then we use it," Rachel said. "Let them squeeze him. Follow the trail." I shook my head. "Too risky. If Dwyer thinks I'm guarding a package worth $7 million, he won't stop at Cole. He'll keep coming until one of us is in the ground." Rachel's lips curved into that dangerous smile I remembered from years past. "Then let's take the fight to him." I looked toward the dark river, the warehouse lights glinting faintly in the distance. My cane felt heavy in my grip, not with age, but with purpose. "For once," I said, "I agree with you." And as the mist curled around us, I knew the quiet life I'd built here was over. Dwyer had chosen the wrong town, the wrong man, and the wrong past to dig up. We waited until the clock pushed past 2 in the morning. By then, the pool hall had gone dark, the streets emptied, and even the river seemed to move quieter, as if it knew something was about to happen. Rachel and I sat in my living room, the air heavy with unspoken tension. The photos from her file lay spread across the coffee table, lit by the faint glow of a desk lamp. She tapped the picture of the man with the signet ring. "That's Dwyer's right hand. Name's Leclerc, ex-French Foreign Legion, discharged under questionable circumstances. If he's here, this isn't just a money grab. They're scouting for long-term operations." I leaned back, cane across my lap, eyes fixed on the folder. "Then we need eyes inside that warehouse, tonight." Rachel gave me a look I knew too well. "We're not 20 anymore, Dan. You've got a limp, and I've got a shoulder that seizes up in the cold. We're not ghosts. We're people now. People who get caught." I met her gaze. "We don't need to be ghosts. We just need to remind them that we're not prey." The silence stretched until finally she smirked. "You always did get sentimental before a fight." By 3, we were crouched in the weeds along the riverbank. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking shadow against the fog, its corrugated steel walls humming with faint vibrations from inside. A chain-link fence surrounded the lot, topped with rusting coils of barbed wire. 2 guards patrolled lazily by the gate, rifles slung across their shoulders. Rachel handed me a small black pouch. "Still trust me?" I opened it. Inside were 3 small smoke canisters, improvised but reliable. I chuckled softly. "Never doubted you." We circled wide, slipping through a gap in the fence where weeds had grown thick enough to hide the tear in the metal. The earth was damp beneath my boots, the scent of oil and rust hanging heavy in the air. We reached a side entrance, half hidden by a stack of empty pallets. Rachel picked the lock in less than 30 seconds, her hands still as deft as they'd been 15 years ago. The door swung open on silent hinges. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast long, unforgiving shadows. Crates were stacked in neat rows, each stamped with shipping codes that meant nothing to the untrained eye. But I knew military logistics when I saw them. Weapons, maybe narcotics, maybe both. And men. At least a dozen of them scattered through the space, some cleaning rifles, others moving crates, 2 hunched over a laptop at a folding table. Rachel's breath was barely audible. "Too many to fight?" Then we don't fight, I murmured. We watch. We slipped behind a stack of crates, peering through the gaps. My eyes landed on him, Vincent Dwyer, mid-50s, hair slicked back, wearing a tailored suit that didn't belong in a warehouse at 3 in the morning. He was speaking with Leclerc, his tone calm but his gestures sharp. "The old man," I caught him saying. "Carter, he's the key. Find him, break him, and the package is ours." Leclerc grunted. "What if he doesn't break?" Dwyer smiled thinly. "Everyone breaks." Rachel's eyes flicked to mine. I felt a cold anger rise in my chest, steady and sharp. They thought they could unmake me like some weak recruit. They thought my life, my secrets, my $7 million package was theirs to claim. We crouched there another 10 minutes, memorizing guard patterns, noting exits, watching the rhythm of their operation. Then Rachel nudged my arm. "Time to go." We slipped back the way we came, silent as the grave. The fog cloaked our retreat until the warehouse disappeared behind us. Back at my house, dawn was bleeding pale light into the horizon. I sat heavily in my chair by the window, Rachel pacing like a caged panther. "They're serious," she said. "This isn't some smash-and-grab crew. They'll burn this town down if they think it gets them what they want." "Then we don't wait for them to come again," I said. My voice was low, calm, final. "We take it to them, one by one, piece by piece, until Dwyer realizes he made the worst mistake of his life." Rachel stopped pacing, looking at me. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years, a mixture of fear and admiration. "You're not going to stop, are you?" she asked quietly. I met her gaze. "Not until they do." The first light of morning spilled across the room, catching the steel tip of my cane. It gleamed like a blade. And for the first time in years, I felt alive again. Winter rolled in hard that year. The river froze in jagged sheets. The fields wore a dull crust of snow, and every sound carried farther in the cold air. Life in town settled into a tense rhythm, outwardly calm, but with a thread of unease running through it. Folks went about their business, but eyes lingered longer on unfamiliar cars. Conversations hushed when certain names were mentioned. Rachel and I kept watch, though in different ways. She had a habit of walking the block late at night, her silhouette a silent guardian under the streetlights. I stayed close to home, ears tuned for the wrong kind of silence. Together, we built a net of small precautions. Coded notes to Eli, burner phones stashed in 3 places, cameras hidden in flower pots along my porch. Then, one night in December, the quiet shattered. It began with the dog across the street barking, 3 sharp bursts, then silence, too clean to be coincidence. I was already moving when I heard the crunch of boots in snow, too heavy, too deliberate. Rachel was in the kitchen sipping tea. She dropped the cup the instant I raised 2 fingers. "Company," I whispered. The knock came. Not polite, not testing. A hammering of fists against the door. "Carter!" A voice boomed, accented, guttural. "We talk, now!" Rachel's hand went to the pistol tucked at her side. I shook my head. "Not yet." The door rattled under another blow. I opened it. 3 men stood in the glow of the porch light, their breath steaming in the cold. Heavy coats, black gloves, eyes that had seen too much. Professionals, not punks. The leader stepped forward, his jaw square, his gaze steady. "Message from Mr. Dwyer. He says no more games." I met his stare. "Then why send boys to my porch?" Something flickered in his eyes, but he masked it with a thin smile. "He offers you one chance. Come to him. Tonight. Alone." Rachel shifted behind me, unseen by them. I kept my face calm. "And if I don't?" The man's smile widened, but not kindly. "Then winter comes for you faster." He turned on his heel, his men following without another word. Their boots crunched away into the night until the sound faded into the snow. Rachel exhaled sharply. "They want you to walk into a trap." Of course they do, I said. But traps can be useful if you spring them the right way. We sat at the table, the air thick with the scent of spilled tea and gun oil. Rachel studied me like she had in the old days, her eyes weighing risks, calculating outcomes. "You're thinking of going," she said. "I'm thinking of ending this," I replied. "Dan." "He won't stop. Not until he thinks I'm buried. That meeting is his way of pulling me out into the open. Fine, let him. But I won't be the one who walks away surprised." Rachel leaned back, arms crossed. "Then we make it ours, not his." We spent the next 48 hours preparing. The meeting place was set, a derelict cannery on the outskirts of town, half collapsed from years of neglect. Perfect for an ambush, perfect for an ending. I reached out to Eli, brief and direct. "Cannery, midnight, watch for movement." His reply came minutes later. "Eyes in the dark, you won't be alone." Rachel and I armed ourselves not with firepower, we couldn't match them there, but with intelligence. We mapped the cannery's entrances, the weak beams, the skylight that offered a vantage point. We laid out contingencies, escape routes, signals, fallback positions. When midnight came, the world seemed to hold its breath. The cannery loomed against the moonlight, its windows like hollow eyes. I walked to the front entrance with my cane in hand, every step measured. Rachel slipped through the shadows, unseen, circling wide to the skylight. Inside, the air reeked of rust and mildew. A single lantern burned in the center of the room, throwing long, jagged shadows. Dwyer stood there, flanked by Leclerc and 4 more men. His suit looked out of place, his face drawn tight with something between anger and desperation. "Mr. Carter," he said smoothly, as if we were old colleagues. "You made it." I stopped 10 feet from him. "You invited me." He spread his hands. "I prefer civilized ends to childish games. You've cost me time, money, and trust, but it doesn't have to go further. Hand over what you've been protecting, and I'll let you live out your twilight years in peace." I tilted my head. "You think I've been fighting you for money?" Dwyer's eyes narrowed. "Everyone fights for money." "No," I said softly. "Some of us fight because men like you think money is the only thing worth bleeding for." Leclerc's hand twitched toward his pistol. The others shifted, tense. That was Rachel's cue. A hiss split the air. Smoke canisters dropped from above, filling the room in a choking haze. Shouts erupted, weapons raised blindly. I moved fast, cane striking knees and wrists, a blur of controlled violence. Rachel's silhouette flickered through the smoke, her pistol cracking once, twice, not killing, but disabling, precise as ever. By the time the smoke thinned, Dwyer was on his knees, Leclerc disarmed, his men groaning on the floor. My cane pressed against Dwyer's throat. His composure cracked at last. You won't get away with this," he rasped. I leaned close, my voice cold as the winter night. "I already have." From the shadows, Eli's voice echoed, calm and cutting. "Everything's on tape. Enough to bury you." Dwyer's eyes darted wildly. For the first time, he looked small. We didn't kill him. That wasn't our way. But when the authorities came for him, drawn by Eli S. leaks and Rachel S. recordings, Dwyer S. empire crumbled like the cannery walls around him. Weeks later, the snow melted and the town breathed easier. Dwyer's name became a curse spoken only in hushed tones, like a bad dream finally shaken off. One morning, Martha poured my coffee and gave me a knowing smile. "Seems quieter lately, Mr. Carter." I smiled back, stirring the cup. "For now," I said, "because men like Dwyer always had shadows, and shadows never stayed gone forever. But the town knew now, and I knew. Weakness was never my curse. It was their mistake, and as long as I drew breath, I would never let them forget it." Spring returned with a shy, cautious light like a town waking from a long, weary dream. The river loosened its ice and carried the last of winter's refuse downstream. People mended fences, repaired porches, barred windows less often. There were new faces on front porches, neighbors who smiled with a steadier look now, and fewer quick glances over shoulders. The diner filled earlier, and the bar at the Blue Anchor hummed with less guarded laughter. Small victories changed the shape of ordinary days. Rachel and I kept our routines because habit was both comfort and camouflage. I still limped to the hardware store for real nails and rope and for things that had nothing at all to do with survival. Sandpaper, a new padlock, a tin of enamel paint. Rachel walked her block at night, and sometimes she'd join me at the diner just to watch the town breathe. We never stopped listening. We simply listened with less terror and more calculation. Dwyer's trial was clumsy spectacle and quiet legalism at once. In court, his lawyers moved like dancers with expensive shoes, trying to turn evidence into fog. He attempted intimidations, calls, threats, a last-ditch smear campaign. Yet the ledger we'd liberated and the recordings Rachel had made were steady, stubborn things. Men testified. An accountant who'd been bribed, a courier who'd been paid to keep his mouth shut, a broker who finally preferred immunity to loyalty. The federal agent who'd taken interest in our fractured trail turned a string of small fines into a case sharp enough to hold up under pressure. When the verdict came, the courtroom was full of faces from the town, people who learned to pay attention and to act, and it felt, absurdly, like a ceremony. Dwyer sat with a small, furious set to his jaw. He was convicted not because I had the most to hide or because I was the loudest witness, but because the truth once assembled won in its quiet way. He got years, not the kind of instant annihilation some men wanted, but the slow, proper undoing that left a ledger of consequences and an empty front office. He tried, even behind bars, to reach out through lawyers and proxies, but his money bought less with each day. Men who'd once stood in his orbit found new arrangements. Some were prosecuted, others fled. The warehouse emptied and then was boarded up, its graffiti flaking away like a bad memory. A new small business opened where the generator had been sabotaged. A woman from town bought it and painted it teal. In the months after, I found myself doing small, human things I'd let go of for the thrilling, if foolish pleasures of being useful. I planted roses in the front bed, tender and precise, careful for the first buds. Martha teased me about talking to the seedlings like they were recruits. "You give them a speech every morning, Mr. Carter," she said, pouring coffee with hands that had learned to steady themselves after all the disasters any small town keeps. "I'm trying to make them brave," I told her. She laughed. "They don't need to be brave, they need to be stubborn. Like you." Rachel and I mended what we could, not relationships torn by suspicion so much as the frayed edges of our own nerves. We spoke of old ghosts sometimes, but not in the business-like way we'd once used to debrief operations. We spoke like two people who had stared at a long life and decided to keep a small portion of it peaceful. Eli kept his distance in the way of old friends who understand boundaries. He checked in with a message now and then, one line, half joke, half warning. "Don't let Dwyer make you soft, old man." I would call back with a report that was mostly about the town and a little about the way the sky looked. He sent no more men, no more favors, only the comfort of knowing someone with a long reach still watched. Cole never came back. That gnawed at me in a private way I didn't share too often. Sometimes I would think I heard his footsteps at the bar, felt the ghost of his fear like a draft under a door, and I would walk outside to check the night. He'd chosen a map away, and whether it bought him a chance or a hiding place was a story I let finish without me. Some debts you pay by letting people go. There were nights, rare, sharp, when the past bled through. A bag slid onto my porch with no note attached. A car idled too long at the corner and then left. A man with a signet ring was seen in a diner an hour away and reported. Each time, the reflex was the same. The cane felt different in my hand, less symbolic and more a tool, an extension of contracts I had kept with myself. But the reflex passed faster than it once had. The town had learned to breathe between scares. The ledger I'd protected, the reason men had come with intimidation, the kernel of that whole ugly calculus, was not what most believed. It wasn't a suitcase of cash or a secret account with an easy key. It had been a set of names and arrangements, a safety built at the edges of a career where favors meant lives. Part of me wanted to burn it whole, to erase the past with a single ceremonial flame. But history binds itself in paper and in memory, and paper can be used to hold people accountable. So we shared what needed to be shared with investigators and kept the rest where it belonged, tucked away, small and practical, in a lockbox that now rarely left the closet. The town grew more watchful and less willing to be markets for men like Dwyer. A council meeting I attended, nothing more than a seat in the back with a mug of too strong coffee, turned into a forum where citizens asked tight, uncompromising questions about permits and shipping manifests and leases. People who had once been loath to ruffle feathers learned the value of discomfort. Protest moved from whispers to minutes on an agenda. Sometimes, when the sun scraped low and I had finished tending the roses, I would walk to the river and think about the quiet work of moving currents. The water carried stones and leaves, sometimes life, sometimes loss. You could not stop the river. You could only place yourself where you could watch it and, if necessary, guide a boat through dangerous reeds. Rachel left in the fall. Not forever. She left to teach at a program across the state to take care of a niece and to see a city occasionally, but she left in such a way that there was always a room in her schedule for this town and her name in my burner for emergencies that never came. We did not make promises because promises feel too much like contracts and too little like living. Instead, we left with a deeper certainty, that we had done what we had to do and that the precaution of friendship was as useful as any weapon. Years later, a boy I'd watched grow at the diner confided in me that he wanted to be a cop. He had read about Dwyer in the paper and wanted to do something that mattered. I gave him a small, sly smile and told him the truth. If you want to be useful, learn to read people, not just laws. Laws change. People don't. He laughed, as boys do when given half-truths dressed as wisdom. He drank his coffee black and left with a wave. I watched him go and thought of all the men who'd once sat where he sat, young, hopeful, naive. My work had been to remind a town that hope mattered enough to guard. On quiet afternoons, when the sun slanted warm through the kitchen window and the roses leaned toward the light like small citizens voting for spring, I would sit and listen. Sometimes, in those hours, I would hum a bit of an old field song Rachel used to whistle when we were young and reckless. It was a small thing. It felt like contraband and like peace. The cane rests by the door now more from habit than need. I still carry it when I walk, if only as a proof to the world that appearances are a language and that language can be wielded. People still underestimate, perhaps because it makes the world gentler to believe no one knows how to hurt. But underestimation also carries a courtesy when you are the one living beneath it. I chose long ago to be underestimated. It is a useful tactic in a life built on surprise. If you asked me whether the cost was worth it, whether the sleepless years and the quiet threats were fair exchange for the town's peace, I would tell you the simple truth. I paid in pieces. Some of them I mourned, some I celebrated. Some I would pay again. There is a small, stubborn part of humanity that prefers to stand when standing is hardest. That part of me kept walking when it would have been easier to sit. On a cool evening, years after the first knock at my door, as the sun slid under the line of maples and the diner sign buzzed its sleepy end of day, Rachel called. Her voice was the same, weathered, warm. "How are the roses?" she asked. "Brave," I said. "Good," she replied. "Keep them wild, Daniel. The world needs stubborn things." I hung up and went outside. The air smelled like the river after rain. I ran my fingers along a stem and found a thorn. It pricked me and I smiled, because some things that hurt remind you you're alive. I sat on the porch, Kane leaning against my knee, and watched the town I'd helped protect settle into night. If threats rose again, if a new Dwyer wandered in thinking he could buy whatever he wanted, the town would be ready. So would I. Not because of a $7 million package or favors or ghosts of agencies past, but because people who have been taught to defend their own will do so. They bring neighbors into the light, and they refuse to let darkness buy the quiet. I lifted my coffee, took a slow sip, and listened as the night kept its secrets. The world would always need guarding. For now, the roses were safe, and so were the people who loved them. I was content with that, and with the knowledge that readiness is a quiet, ongoing thing, like tending a garden, like watching a river, like keeping a cane by the door. The years passed slowly, but they passed steady, like the river's current smoothing sharp stones. The town healed in ways I hadn't expected. New families moving in, old houses painted fresh, children playing in yards that had once been watched with suspicion. What lingered wasn't fear anymore, but a kind of watchful pride. Folks remembered what had happened. They remembered who had tried to buy their silence, and they remembered they'd chosen not to sell. I aged with them. My hair thinned, my limp grew more pronounced. But I walked every day, cane tapping in rhythm with the sidewalks. I sat at the diner with Martha until she retired, and when her niece took over, I was already part of the furniture. Always the first customer, always black coffee, always a nod and a small joke about the weather. Sometimes a stranger would come through town, too curious, too sharp. They'd sit at the bar or lean against the wall at a council meeting. When that happened, I'd watch quietly. The stranger would notice eventually. My stillness, my eyes. And more often than not, they'd leave within a week. The town had learned to repel predators the way a body rejects infection. Rachel visited less often, though her voice came through the phone steady as ever. She sent postcards sometimes from cities she claimed she hated, but seemed to stay in anyway. On the back, she'd write one line, "Keep your roses alive," or "The world still needs stubborn men." The roses became my measure of time. Each spring I cut them back. Each summer I coaxed them taller. Each autumn I let them rest. Neighbors started asking for cuttings, and soon the town had roses on porches, in backyards, by fences. A quiet army of blooms, thorned and beautiful, stubborn as their keeper. Then, one evening long after Dwyer's name had stopped being spoken aloud, a letter arrived. Not a threat. Something stranger. It bore no return address, only a faint watermark of an old emblem I recognized from my agency years. Inside was a single sheet. I sat with that letter for a long time, the paper heavy in my hands. A reminder that the past never truly loosens its grip, even when it pretends to. They hadn't forgotten me, even if the world had moved on. I wasn't sure if it was a courtesy or a warning. Maybe both. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat on the porch with the cane across my knees, and the stars above me, brighter than they had any right to be. For a long while, I thought about endings. The kind you choose, the kind that are chosen for you, and the kind that just arrive when you're not paying attention. In the morning, the roses needed watering. The town needed watching. A young boy waved at me as he pedaled past on his bicycle, and I raised my hand in return. Life wasn't about grand finales anymore. It was about the quiet discipline of showing up, of keeping the porch light on, of being underestimated until the moment came to remind the world what you were made of. I was older, yes, slower, certainly, but not weak. Never weak. And if the day came when another shadow thought to test that truth, they'd learn what Dwyer had learned, what so many before him had forgotten. That some men never really stop fighting, they only fight differently. And I, cane in hand, roses at my door, would always be ready. Summer settled over the town with a heavy warmth, the kind that slowed everything down, except the memories. Heat has a way of stirring ghosts, and in that still air, I felt the past brushing against me again. It started small. A black SUV parked outside the diner 3 mornings in a row, the kind with tinted windows and plates that didn't quite match the county. The driver never got out, just sat there, engine humming, air conditioning running. Martha's niece asked me if it was FBI, DEA, or just tourists with bad taste in breakfast. I smiled, sipped my coffee, and told her it was none of her concern. But it was mine. That night, I sat by the window with the lights off and watched the street. Sure enough, the SUV rolled slow past my house at midnight, its headlights dimmed. Too cautious for locals, too bold for government. I phoned Rachel. "They're sniffing around again," I said. Her sigh was sharp in my ear. "Not cartel. They don't circle that long without striking. Could be private contractors, clean-up crews for someone who still thinks you're holding something." "The ledger's gone," I said. "You and I know that. Doesn't mean everyone believes it." For a few days, the SUV vanished. Then a stranger showed up at the hardware store. Tall, expensive jacket, hands too smooth for farm work. He bought rope, nails, and a padlock. I asked if he was fixing a shed. He didn't answer. He just smiled, paid cash, and left without saying another word. That night, Rachel was on my porch. No phone call, no warning. Just there, like she'd stepped out of the shadows. "You've got tails," she said simply. "Thought I might," I answered. She set her bag down, pulled out a folded map. "I traced the SUV's plates, Shell Company out of Delaware. Guess where it leads?" I waited. "Miami," she said. The name hung in the air like a curse. "Dwyer." I frowned. "He's locked up. Prison doesn't mean powerless," Rachel said. "Men like him build escape hatches. Even if it's not him, it's someone picking through his leftovers." We walked the block together, silent, scanning porches, listening to the hum of cicadas. Finally, Rachel stopped. "You can't keep doing this forever, Dan." "Doing what?" "Guarding everything with one hand on a cane and the other on the past." I studied her in the dim glow of the streetlight. "If I don't, who will?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The next day, the SUV was gone, but the quiet felt sharper, as if something had shifted. My roses bloomed defiantly, thorns catching the sun, but I watered them with a heavier hand, knowing peace was never permanent. Later, a letter slid under my door. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded page with blocky handwriting I hadn't seen in years. 4 words. "The debt isn't paid." I read it 3 times, then set it on the table beside my coffee. My pulse stayed steady, but inside a familiar hum returned, the readiness I thought had faded with the seasons, because someone out there still believed I owed them. And if they came to collect, they'd learn, just like all the others had, that weakness was never the truth of me. It was only the mask I wore until the fight came knocking. And the fight was on its way. The letter changed everything. I'd grown used to shadows circling, used to the idea that old enemies sometimes tested fences before retreating. But a note slipped under my door meant something different. It wasn't surveillance anymore. It was intrusion. It was declaration. Whoever had left it knew where I slept, knew how close they could get. That wasn't a probe. It was a promise. Rachel didn't like it. She read the page once, twice, then crumpled it in her fist. "This isn't cartel or contractors," she said. "This is personal." "Dwyer?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. He's rotting in a cell with his empire cut out from under him. This feels smaller. Someone who thinks you wronged them. Someone who thinks you owe them." I leaned back in my chair, cane across my knees. "Plenty of people could think that." Rachel met my eyes, steady. "Then we narrow it down." That night we started digging. She tapped her old contacts, whispered questions through encrypted channels. I called Eli, who answered on the second ring. "You've stirred the nest again," he said without preamble. "I didn't stir it," I replied. "It came to my door. He grunted. Word is, a man named Vincent Dwyer Jr. has been making noise. His father's locked up, but the kid's got money, got resentment, and got a list of people to blame. Guess whose name is at the top? I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course. The sins of the father never stayed buried. Junior's sloppy, Eli continued. He's not a strategist. He's a bruiser with cash. Thinks if he scares you enough, you'll fold. He's making a mistake, I said. Eli chuckled low. They always do. Rachel listened as I hung up. So the kid wants revenge. Seems that way. Then he's already lost, she said flatly. Anger doesn't win against patience. Still, patience had limits. 2 nights later, the SUV returned, but this time it didn't park. It idled in front of my house for a long moment, then rolled down the block and stopped at Martha S. old place, now home to her niece and her 2 young children. My grip tightened on the cane. Rachel, watching beside me, whispered, "They're probing your weakness." "They won't find it there," I said, already moving. I stepped out onto the porch, calm, deliberate, letting the porch light frame me. The SUV's engine purred, headlights glaring. For a long beat, no one moved. Then the passenger window rolled down. A young man leaned out, maybe late 20s, slick hair, sharp suit. His face carried the smug arrogance of inherited wealth. "Mr. Carter," he called, voice mocking. "My father sends his regards." Rachel swore under her breath. I didn't flinch. "Your father's regards mean as much as his promises. Nothing." The young man's smile faltered. He looked at me too long, too hard, before the window slid up again. The SUV pulled away, tail lights glowing red against the dark. Rachel exhaled. "Junior." "Junior," I agreed. It wasn't just about me anymore. If he was willing to circle families, neighbors, innocents, then the fight wasn't waiting to come. It was already here. I closed the door, set the cane beside me, and picked up the lockbox. The burner phone felt cold in my hand, heavier than it should have. I hadn't wanted to open this chapter again, hadn't wanted to dial the 3rd number, but Junior had crossed a line. And when I pressed that number, I knew what I was asking for. Not favors, not surveillance, war. The voice that answered was female, calm, and dangerous. "Carter. Been a long time." "Yes," I said quietly. "And I'm calling in the last debt." There was silence, then a soft laugh. "Then someone out there just made a very stupid mistake." Rachel's eyes met mine across the room. She knew, even before I said it. This wouldn't end with warnings or smoke canisters. Not this time. This time, it would end the way all unfinished wars must, completely. The next morning, the town looked the same, but I didn't. I sat at the diner like I always did. Black coffee, corner booth, one hand resting on the cane. Martha's niece refilled my cup, smiling politely, but her eyes flicked to the bruise along my knuckle from training the night before. She didn't ask. Folks around here had learned not to. Rachel slid into the booth across from me. She wore a plain jacket, hair tied back, but her presence filled the room like a storm cloud. "You called her," she said. Not a question. I nodded. "Last debt." Rachel's lips pressed thin. "Then it's already moving." She was right. By sundown, the SUV was gone, replaced by 2 men loitering near the hardware store, pretending to shop for fertilizer in the wrong season. Another shadow sat 3 stools down at the bar, pretending not to listen. Junior's arrogance was showing. His net was too wide, his eyes too obvious. He wanted me rattled. Instead, I was calm, because I knew who was coming. 2 nights later, she arrived. Her name was Morgan Hale, and she had once been the sharpest blade in the agency's drawer. We'd worked together on one operation years ago in Prague. Her eyes cold as winter, her smile a rare, dangerous thing. The agency owed me one, but she owed me more. She stepped onto my porch without knocking, black coat brushing the floorboards, hair silvered now, but her stride still lethal. Daniel Carter, she said with a half-smile. I wondered if you'd die before I got to see you again. Not yet, I replied. Rachel emerged from the kitchen, hand on her hip. You brought her? Morgan smirked. He didn't bring me. He summoned me. Her gaze flicked to Rachel. And you must be the reason he hasn't gone soft. Rachel's eyes narrowed. I'm the reason he's still alive. For a moment, the tension crackled like wires sparking. Then Morgan laughed softly. Good. He'll need both of us. We sat at the table, the three of us, the weight of old debts and new dangers pressing in. Morgan spread photos across the wood, grainy shots of Junior, his men, the SUV, and a rented house outside town where lights burned at odd hours. He's sloppy, she said, but sloppy men are unpredictable, which makes them dangerous. Rachel pointed to one photo. That house. Too much movement for a hideout. It's a staging point. Correct, Morgan said. He's planning something bigger, not just intimidation, a strike. I leaned back, folding my hands. Then we don't wait for it. Morgan's smile was razor thin. I hoped you'd say that. The plan wasn't elegant, but it didn't need to be. It needed to be final. Rachel traced routes on the map, noting where Junior's men rotated shifts. Morgan outlined pressure points, phones to clone, vehicles to disable, choke points to force them into. My role was simpler, bait. I'd been bait before. It was never pleasant, but it was always effective. 3 nights later, I sat on a bench at the park near the river, cane resting against my leg. Book in hand, I wasn't reading. Streetlights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the shadows, Rachel was watching with her pistol ready. Morgan was farther out, unseen, pulling the strings. The SUV arrived right on time. Doors opened, men stepped out. 3, then 4, then Junior himself. He looked smaller without the glass between us, his arrogance covering the cracks in his confidence. Mr. Carter, he called, mocking again. Out for a stroll? Thought I'd join you. I closed the book, set it beside me. You're out of your depth, boy. His smile faltered, just a fraction. You think you can scare me with old man lines? You ruined my father. Now I ruin you. He gestured, and his men moved closer. That was the cue. One engine coughed and died. Morgan's work. Then another. Confusion spread like a ripple. Rachel's shot cracked the night. Precise, not lethal, but enough to take the gun out of a man's hand. Shouts erupted. I stood, cane in hand, eyes locked on Junior. This is where you learn the truth, I said. He raised his pistol, but his hand shook. You're just a relic. No, I said, stepping closer as his men scrambled. I'm the reminder of what happens when you mistake restraint for weakness. Morgan's voice came from the dark, calm and cutting. Drop it, Junior. You've already lost. He spun, panicked, realizing too late how surrounded he was. Rachel stepped into the light, weapon steady. His men, disarmed and disabled, groaned on the ground. Junior's eyes darted from me to them, to the shadows where Morgan's presence pressed like a blade at his throat. Finally, his pistol clattered to the ground. You don't get to claim your father's war, I told him. It's over, and if you're smart, you'll disappear before it buries you. Rachel cuffed him while Morgan retrieved the SUV's hidden cash. Phones, cash, false IDs. Enough evidence to tie Junior to threats and worse. By dawn, federal hands would have him. As the sun broke, Rachel and Morgan stood on either side of me. We were older, slower, scarred, but still standing. Junior was finished. But I knew shadows would always come back in different forms with different names. And I would always be here, cane in hand, roses at my door, waiting. Because weakness was the mask, readiness was the truth, and the fight, whenever it came, would always find me prepared. The town never saw the details, not really. They only heard what filtered through the news. Local authorities cooperate with federal agents in apprehending Vincent Dwyer, Jr., son of convicted Miami businessman. They didn't know about the midnight park, the SUV disabled in seconds, the way Junior's hand shook when he realized his father's shadow couldn't protect him. That was fine. They didn't need to know. Life slipped back into its quiet rhythm, though with a little more steel under the surface. Neighbors waved longer, eyes meeting mine with gratitude they didn't put into words. Martha's niece gave me free coffee, for life, though I paid anyway. Children rode their bikes past my porch, laughing, the kind of laughter that sounded like a victory in itself. Rachel stayed another week, long enough to walk the block twice a night with me and make sure the air had settled. Then she left again, promising to return when the roses bloomed. Morgan didn't stay at all. She vanished the way only someone trained to disappear can, 1 minute at my table, the next gone without a sound. She left a single note on the counter. Debt repaid. Keep your edge. For a while, it almost felt like peace, but peace is never permanent. One evening, near the end of summer, I heard a knock at the door. Not the pounding of intruders, not the polite tap of neighbors. This was different, even deliberate. A pattern I hadn't heard in decades. I opened the door. A man in a gray suit stood on the porch, his tie neat, his shoes polished. His face was ordinary, the kind of face you forget in a second. But his eyes carried the weight of an institution. "Mr. Carter," he said softly, "may I come in?" I hesitated. "Agency." He gave the smallest of nods. I let him inside. He glanced at the cane, the roses through the window, the photos on the mantle of neighbors' kids who'd grown up under my watch. Then he turned to me. "You've made quite a lot of noise for someone who is supposed to be retired." "Noise has a way of finding me," I said. His lips curved faintly. "Vincent Jr.'s arrest was useful. You exposed channels we'd been trying to track for years. But you also exposed yourself." I said nothing. He leaned forward. "There are people in the world who now know you. We're not just some old man with a limp. They'll come. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they'll come. And when they do, you won't be able to fight them alone." I studied him. "So, what are you offering?" "A choice," he said. "We can fold you back in. Quiet work, limited but with protection. Or," he glanced at the cane again, "you can keep pretending you're retired. And when the next shadow knocks, you'll have to answer alone." The house was silent but for the ticking clock on the wall. Outside, children's voices echoed faintly as they chased fireflies. I thought about the roses, about Rachel's stubborn smile, about Morgan's cold laugh. I thought about Junior's arrogance and his father's empire, about the way evil always seemed to regenerate, like weeds through cracks in the pavement. Finally, I spoke. "I'll think about it." The man in gray nodded, stood, and adjusted his tie. "Do, but don't take too long. The world doesn't pause just because you've earned the right to rest." He left as quietly as he came, his car slipping away into the dusk without a sound. I sat back down, cane across my knees, and stared out the window at the roses glowing in the last light of day. Maybe I'd take the offer. Maybe I wouldn't. But one truth hadn't changed. I wasn't weak. I was never weak. And if the world wanted to test that truth again, I was ready. Always ready. The night after the man in gray left, sleep never came. I sat in my chair by the window, cane across my knees, listening to the house breathe around me. Every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the siding, it all felt sharper, heavier. His words replayed in my head. "You won't be able to fight them alone." At dawn, I brewed coffee and walked outside. The roses stood tall, defiant in the cool morning light. They'd survived storms, frost, and neglect, because I'd tended them, because I hadn't left them to fend for themselves. That thought sat in my chest like a stone. Rachel called that afternoon. "You sound tired," she said. "Visitor last night," I told her. Her silence stretched. "Agency?" "Yes." "What did they want?" I exhaled slowly. Back in the fold. Quiet work, they say. Protection. She laughed, sharp and bitter. There's no such thing as quiet work with them. You know that. I know, I said, but he wasn't wrong. Junior was just noise. There will be others, bigger, smarter. I'm not 20 anymore, Rachel. The next shadow that comes might not trip so easily. Her voice softened. You're not alone. You've got me. I smiled despite myself. You're not supposed to be here, remember? You promised yourself out. I promised myself alive, she corrected. That's different. The line went quiet, both of us knowing she'd show up again if I asked, maybe even if I didn't. 2 weeks passed. The man in gray didn't return, but his presence lingered. I began to notice small things again, details I'd trained myself to see years ago. A phone booth across from the diner with fresh gum stuck on the receiver. A man at the grocery store buying nothing but a newspaper and leaving without looking at it. An unmarked utility van parked 2 blocks down, same spot 3 days in a row. The agency wasn't watching me. They were watching around me. That night I opened the lockbox and stared at the 3 numbers. One was Eli, always reliable. One was Rachel, always stubborn. The last, the one I'd sworn never to touch again, was a direct line into the gray corridors where men like me were filed away under assets. I didn't dial it, not yet. Instead, I called Eli. You've seen them, I said. Yeah, he replied. They're circling, not enemies, ours, which means something's brewing. Bigger than Junior? Much, Eli said. Think global, not local. Think something they can't keep clean without an old dog they trust. I rubbed my temples. And if I refuse? They'll keep you under glass. You'll still be in play, just without the choice. When I hung up, I knew 2 things. First, that the man in gray hadn't given me an option at all. And second, that the quiet life I'd built here was hanging by a thread. That night I sat on the porch, cane in one hand, coffee in the other, and waited. Sure enough, footsteps approached. Not stealthy ones, measured, deliberate. The man in gray returned. Mr. Carter, he said, stopping at the edge of the porch light. Have you thought? I've thought, I said. And? I looked past him, out to the street, where kids' bicycles leaned against fences and neighbors' lights flickered warm in their windows. This was the life I'd fought for, the peace I'd bled for. And yet, beyond that peace, the world kept spinning shadows. Finally, I stood, the cane clicking against the wood. If I come back, I said, I do it on my terms. My town stays untouched. My people stay safe. And I don't answer to anyone who thinks they can pull my strings. The man in gray's lips curved into something between a smile and a smirk. You wouldn't be here if you didn't still crave the fight. I didn't deny it. He nodded once. We'll be in touch. When he left, the night felt heavier, the choice sharper. I sat back down, sipping cooling coffee, staring at the roses in the dark. Because I knew, with a clarity that both steadied and haunted me, that I'd just agreed to step back into the war. Not for money, not for glory, but because some battles never end. And I was still ready to fight them. The call came 3 weeks later, just after dawn. The phone in the lockbox buzzed, a harsh, mechanical vibration that hadn't sounded in years. I stared at it for a long moment, the way a soldier might stare at a rifle he swore he'd buried. Then I answered. Carter, the voice said. Not a question, not a greeting. I told your man my terms, I replied. And we accepted them, the voice said evenly. We need you. A limited operation, short duration. You're the only one alive who's run this play before. What play? A pause. Then, an old network, broken but not gone. Someone stitching it back together, funding, arms, safe houses. Same blueprint you dismantled in Berlin '87. Same signature, only now it's bigger. Global. I felt the old scar in my side ache, the one I'd earned in that city. Berlin was a memory I hadn't wanted to reopen. But the voice was right. I knew the pattern, the signatures, the way this thing breathed. "You want me back in," I said. "We want you to finish what you started." When the line went dead, I sat for a long time in silence. The cane rested against my leg, the roses outside brushed by wind, and for a moment I let myself think about Martha's niece pouring coffee, about the kids on their bikes, about Rachel's stubborn vow to keep me alive. Then I packed. Not much. Old habits taught me that the less you carry, the faster you move. A second cane, hollowed and reinforced. A notebook, worn thin, filled with codes and maps. And a photo of the roses, so I'd remember what I was fighting for. Rachel was waiting on the porch when I stepped outside. "You're going," she said flatly. "Yes." "You're too old for this, Dan." I almost smiled. "I've been too old for a long time." She studied me, eyes sharp, voice low. "Then I'm going with you." "No," I said. "Don't bother," she cut me off. "You need me. You limp, I shoot. You forget, I remember. You fall, I drag you out. We both know it." I held her gaze, searching for the hesitation I might use to dissuade her. There was none. Just fire. "Fine," I said at last. Her shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. "Where to?" "London," I said. "That's where the threads start." We left before dawn, the town still asleep. My roses swayed in the breeze as we drove past, their thorns catching the early light like a line of sentries. London was different from the last time I'd walked its streets. Shinier, louder, but no less full of shadows. The agency's man met us in a quiet cafe near King's Cross, the kind of place where commuters drowned in their phones. He was young, sharp suit, hair slicked back, a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're Carter," he said, as if he'd expected someone taller. "I've read your file." "Then you know the file's a lie," I said, sipping bitter coffee. He blinked. Rachel smirked. "He's going to eat you alive, kid," she told him. The agent cleared his throat and slid a folder across the table. Inside were surveillance photos, warehouses in Hamburg, safe houses in Marseille, coded bank transfers through Cyprus, and one name scribbled at the bottom. A name I hadn't heard in 40 years. My stomach tightened. "He's dead." The agent shook his head. "No. We think he faked it. And now he's back." Rachel leaned over my shoulder. "Who?" I closed the folder slowly, the old ache in my scar pulsing again. "Conrad Weiss," I said, her brow furrowed. "Never heard of him." "You wouldn't have," I said. "He was a ghost. One of the best I ever hunted, and the one who almost killed me in Berlin." Rachel's eyes darkened. "So this isn't just an op. It's unfinished business." I nodded once. "And if Weiss is alive, then this fight is bigger than Dwyer ever dreamed." The cafe hummed with ordinary life around us, cups clinking, steam hissing, but in that moment, I knew normal was gone again. Because the past hadn't just come knocking, it had stepped right back into the room. London was only the beginning. Rachel and I spent 3 days in safe houses, switching locations each night, burning the routes into muscle memory. The agency's young liaison, Harris, fed us files and satellite images as if information alone could replace instinct. He was competent, but too green. He thought in spreadsheets, men like Weiss thought in blood. The first lead took us to Hamburg, a warehouse on the docks, supposedly abandoned, but the ledger showed rent paid 6 months in advance through a chain of shell companies. We arrived before dawn, the air sharp with salt and diesel, gulls screaming above. From the shadows, we watched men unloading crates stamped with agricultural codes. But the weight in their arms, the way they carried the cargo, too careful, too heavy for produce. Weapons. Rachel whispered, 3 guards at the dock, 2 at the door, at least 4 inside. 6 inside, I corrected automatically. Shifting the lights gives them away. She gave me a look, half irritated, half impressed. You still see everything, don't you? Everything that matters. We moved. Not loud, not fast. Controlled. Harris stayed back in the van, comms in our ears. Rachel and I slipped through the side entrance, a gap in the corrugated steel patched with cheap bolts. Inside, the air smelled of grease and gun oil. Crates were pried open under hanging bulbs. Kalashnikov variants, fresh from Eastern factories. Shoulder-fired launchers, enough to turn a quiet port city into a battlefield. And then I saw it. On the wall, tacked between shipping schedules and bank slips, was a photo. Grainy, taken from a distance. My house, my porch, my roses. My chest tightened, but my hand stayed steady. Weiss wasn't just building networks, he was hunting me. Rachel saw it too, her jaw clenched. He knows where you live. Then he knows where to bleed me, I muttered. One guard turned the corner, eyes widening when he saw us. Rachel's pistol coughed once, clean and precise. He dropped without a sound. We slipped out before the others noticed, vanishing into the pre-dawn fog. Back in the van, Harris was pale. You just confirmed the weapons, he said. That's enough to bring Interpol. I slammed the folder shut. It's not about the weapons. It's about me. I jabbed the photo with my cane. He wants me alive long enough to break me. That's what this whole setup is. Bait. Rachel met my eyes. Then we flip it. Make him the bait. Harris frowned. That's not the mission. You're here to confirm, to report. Leave the rest to us. I stared at him, steady and cold. Kid, if Weiss is back, your mission parameters mean nothing. He doesn't care about borders. He doesn't care about agencies. He wants me, and he'll tear apart anyone in his way to get there. Silence filled the van. Harris finally swallowed. Then where do we go? Berlin, I said. Where this all started. If Weiss has resurrected his old network, he'll be there. He always loved that city. It breathes chaos, and he thrives on it. Rachel smirked faintly. Back to Berlin, full circle. The van hummed on the highway, city lights fading behind us. I stared out the window at the dark horizon, my reflection staring back, older, slower, scarred. But my eyes were the same. This wasn't just another operation. This was the ghost of my past rising from the grave, and I intended to put him back in it. The days after Berlin slipped into weeks, and the weeks into months. The world spun on with its noise and chaos, but for once, it spun without me at its center. Weiss was gone. His network collapsed like rotten scaffolding, and the agency, true to its word, sealed the file. No more calls, no more debts. Back home, the town moved as it always had. Slow mornings at the diner, kids laughing on bicycles, neighbors fixing porches and fences. Yet something was different. Not in them, but in me. The weight I had carried for decades, the constant readiness, the certainty that another fight waited just beyond the horizon, was lighter now. The scars were still there, but the war was over. Rachel visited often, sometimes staying for weeks, sometimes only a night. We never spoke of Weiss or Berlin or the agency's man in gray. We didn't need to. Those were chapters already written. Instead, we spoke of smaller things, the stubbornness of roses, the sharpness of coffee, the pleasure of silence shared without fear. One evening, I walked the block alone, cane tapping against the sidewalk. The air was warm, the sky painted gold. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't looking for threats in the shadows. I was simply present. That was the true victory. Not the money, not the $7 million package, not the battles fought and won. It was this: a life reclaimed, a town defended, a peace finally earned. The world would always have its Dwyers and its Weisses. There would always be men who mistook restraint for weakness. But I had proven the truth, to them and to myself. Weakness had never been my curse. It had been my disguise. Now, disguise was no longer necessary. I sat on my porch as the sun set, roses swaying gently in the evening breeze, and let the quiet wrap around me. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the fight. For the first time, the story was over, and that at last was enough.